Good evening, and welcome to the Classified Conflict channel. Tonight's subject is one of the most quietly consequential threads running through the Second World War, not the tank columns, or the bombing campaigns, or the massed infantry offensives, but something far smaller and, in its own way, far more unsettling. Tonight we are looking at the snipers of the Second World War, who they were, how they operated, what they accomplished, and what the experience of that work left behind. This is a subject that rewards slow attention. The history is deep, the individuals involved are remarkable, and the questions it raises about skill and patience and what war asks of the people who fight it are ones that deserve careful consideration rather than quick summary. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome. And if you find value in what you hear tonight, a like and a subscription help this kind of long-form history reach more people. Now, to the history. The word sniper has an origin that is easy to overlook. It came from bird hunting, specifically from the hunting of the snipe, a wading bird considered among the most difficult quarry available to a sportsman in the British colonial world. The snipe was small, erratic in flight, and hard to hit. Hunters who could reliably bring them down became known as snipers, and over time the term transferred from civilian hunting into military use. What began as a description of a man talented enough to shoot a difficult bird became, through the evolution of the rifle and the demands of organized warfare, a description of a trained specialist capable of killing a target at distances exceeding the detection capabilities of the enemy. The concept of the precision marksman is as old as accurate firearms themselves. During the American Civil War, Confederate sharpshooters armed with imported Whitworth rifles demonstrated what a skilled marksman at long range could do to an otherwise well-organized force. The Whitworth rifle, designed by British engineer Joseph Whitworth and trialed in 1857, was capable of accurate fire at 2,000 yards, a range the standard military rifles of the period could not approach. The Confederate forces used it to target Union officers and artillerymen with an effectiveness that caused genuine concern at the federal command level. The consequences of dismissing that threat were illustrated plainly at the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse in May of 1864. Union General John Sedgwick was moving along the front line, observing his troops flinching at distant Confederate sniper fire. He told them they should be ashamed of themselves. The enemy could not hit an elephant at that distance. Moments later, he was shot below his left eye by a Confederate sharpshooter at a range of several hundred yards. He died almost instantly. The story has been repeated many times because it captures something that snipers understand and commanders sometimes overlook. An invisible threat, properly positioned, does not announce itself before it acts. By the time the First World War began, sniping had evolved from selecting the best marksman in a unit and giving him a better rifle into the systematic training of dedicated specialists with precision weapons, telescopic sights, and formal instruction in fieldcraft. In the trenches between 1914 and 1918, both sides ran a persistent parallel conflict alongside the main fighting, a private contest of concealment and patience conducted at ranges of a few hundred yards across no man's land. Snipers on both sides watched and waited for hours, sometimes days, for the moment when an opposing soldier exposed himself long enough to be engaged. Sentries learned quickly that showing any part of the body for more than a few seconds was often fatal. When the war ended in 1918, most nations rapidly dismantled what they had built. The accumulated knowledge of positioning, camouflage, target selection, and the psychological demands of the work was set aside. The prevailing assumption in military planning circles was that the next conflict, if one came, would be a war of movement, tanks, aircraft, motorized infantry, and that the trench sniper belonged to a kind of warfare nobody intended to repeat. The British, who had been among the most sophisticated practitioners of the discipline in the entire First World War, reduced their sniper training to almost nothing. The Americans, who had never invested deeply in the subject, let their limited institutional knowledge dissolve entirely. The Germans followed a similar course through much of the interwar period. There was one partial exception during the interwar years worth noting, the Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 1939. Both sides deployed snipers in the fighting, and a number of Soviet military advisors attached to the Republican forces returned home with observations about how the discipline could be improved and formalized. Those observations fed directly into the sniper training expansion that the Red Army was already beginning to pursue. The Spanish War functioned, in this respect, as a test environment for certain tactical ideas before the much larger conflict that followed. By the late 1930s, with Europe moving toward another catastrophe, most major armies had left themselves without the foundation for something they were shortly going to need badly. The significant exception was the Soviet Union. Soviet military doctrine in the 1930s placed strong emphasis on drawing fully on every element of the fighting force, and civilian marksmanship was actively cultivated across the country. There were clubs, competitions, and a formal certification system called the Voroshilov Sharpshooter Qualification, named after the Soviet Defense Commissar, which rewarded precision shooting and pushed the culture of marksmanship into ordinary life. By 1938, Soviet sources claimed that 6 million citizens had qualified for the badge, a figure that may be overstated, but which nonetheless reflects the seriousness of the program. Beyond civilian promotion, the Soviet military was building dedicated sniper training into its force structure in ways that no other country matched. Soviet snipers were trained in marksmanship and fieldcraft simultaneously, the art of moving without being seen, reading terrain for concealment, understanding how light and shadow interacted with the landscape throughout the day. They were trained to operate alongside regular infantry in realistic combat conditions, not merely on a range. The standard Soviet sniper weapon was a variant of the Mosin Nagant, a bolt-action rifle that had been in Russian military service since 1891. The model 1891/30, fitted with a PU or PE telescopic sight, was what most Soviet snipers carried throughout the war. It was heavy, slow to reload, and in some respects less refined than the German weapons it faced. But it was exceptionally reliable in extreme cold and physical abuse. Some Soviet snipers also used the SVT-40, a semi-automatic rifle offering a higher rate of fire. The choice was generally situational, the bolt action for extended concealment work, where a single shot was the goal, the semi-automatic when the engagement environment demanded more flexibility. By the time the war arrived, the Soviet Union had more properly trained snipers than any other country, by a margin that would shape the fighting on the Eastern Front for years. Before the Eastern Front opened, however, the winter of 1939 produced the most remarkable individual performance in the history of military sniping. It happened in Finland, in conditions that most soldiers would have found unworkable. Simo Häyhä was born in 1905 in a small municipality in southeastern Finland, near the Russian border. He was a slight man, just over 5 feet 2 inches tall, with a mild, self-contained manner and a background that was almost entirely rural. He grew up hunting in the dense forests of Karelia, developing over years the patience and precision that the terrain demanded of anyone who wanted to bring food home. By his teens, he was already an exceptional shot, winning local competitions and spending long hours in the field. He completed mandatory military service at 19, was promoted to corporal, and remained part of Finland's paramilitary civil defense organization, the Suojeluskunta. He did not receive formal sniper training until 1938, 1 year before the war began. The skills that would make him historically singular were not primarily military in origin. They were the product of a rural life, practiced across a lifetime in the forests of Karelia. On November 30th, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland. The disparity in force was substantial. Finland mobilized between 300,000 and 340,000 soldiers. The Red Army that crossed the border numbered between 425,000 and 750,000 men, with a corresponding advantage in tanks, aircraft, and artillery. Stalin had recently completed a sweeping purge of his military leadership, removing or executing a large proportion of the Red Army's most experienced officers. He appeared to believe Finland would fall quickly. The numbers supported that assessment. Häyhä was assigned to the 6th Company of Infantry Regiment 34 and deployed to the Kola front in the Karelia region. Winter temperatures at Kola fell to minus 40 degrees Celsius on the worst days, a threshold at which exposed flesh freezes in minutes and most mechanical systems become unreliable. He dressed in white camouflage and positioned himself before dawn in a prepared snow pit, a shallow depression in the snowfield, where he remained motionless through the short winter daylight hours. He carried bread and sugar in his pockets for energy. He moved as little as possible. He had managed cold since childhood. He worked without a telescopic sight. Almost every serious sniper of the period used optics. The magnification extended effective range, aided target identification, and made precision shooting considerably more achievable. Häyhä rejected them for reasons that were both practical and tactical. A glass lens in extreme cold could fog at a critical moment. Sunlight reflecting off a scope could reveal a carefully concealed position, and using iron sights allowed him to keep his head lower, a small but meaningful reduction in his visible profile above the snow line. He zeroed his iron sights at 150 meters and waited for targets to enter that range. Soviet soldiers moving through the forests and fields of Kola were poorly equipped for the conditions. Winter camouflage was limited or absent for much of the campaign. Their dark coats stood out against the white landscape. Many lacked skis, leaving them moving slowly through terrain that Finnish defenders could cross rapidly. They were advancing into unfamiliar territory, guided by maps that were often inaccurate, against an opponent they could rarely locate. The Finnish defense of Kola was conducted by a numerically inferior force holding a front of approximately 30 kilometers, and the Soviet command devoted considerable resources to breaching it. That it held for as long as it did owed something to geography, something to Finnish tactical resilience, and something to the cumulative disruption that Häyhä and other defenders imposed on Soviet operations in the sector. The kill count, attributed to Häyhä, varies by source. His division commander, Antero Svensson, officially credited him with 219 confirmed rifle kills and an equal number with a submachine gun. Other sources, including a biography by Finnish Army Major Tapio Saarelainen based on years of interviews, cite totals ranging from 500 to 542. Häyhä himself recorded approximately 500 in a memoir discovered in 2017. The inconsistencies are genuine and worth acknowledging. Verification of individual kills in the conditions of the Winter War was difficult, and counting methods varied. What is not contested is that his contribution to the defense of Kola was exceptional, and that the Soviet forces directed against him were progressively unable to suppress him. Counter-sniper teams were sent to locate and eliminate him. They failed. Artillery was called in against areas where he was believed to be operating. He relocated. His kills were accomplished in fewer than 100 days, during a period of the year with only a few hours of daylight, averaging, by the most conservative estimate, multiple kills per available day of light. Finnish High Command presented him with a custom-built sniper rifle in recognition of his service. He declined to use it and continued with his own weapon. The gift weapon, however well made, was not the one he had trained with and calibrated over years. He did not substitute unfamiliarity for performance. Finnish propaganda circulated accounts of him widely, creating the figure of the invisible Finnish soldier. The name that attached to him, the exact origin, is debated, with some historians suggesting it arose more from Finnish wartime propaganda than from direct Soviet usage, was Belaya Smrt, the White Death. A technical detail about his method deserves mention. In the cold Finnish winter, a person's exhaled breath produces a visible cloud of vapor when warm air meets cold. This small betrayal of position was a genuine concern for anyone trying to remain concealed. Häyhä reportedly kept snow in his mouth while he worked. The cold of the snow lowered the temperature of his exhaled breath sufficiently to prevent the vapor from forming. On March 6, 1940, 11 days before the Winter War ended, Häyhä was shot in the face by an explosive bullet during heavy Soviet contact near Kola. The lower left portion of his jaw was destroyed. His comrades carried him from the field expecting he would not survive. He remained unconscious for 11 days, waking on March 13, 1940, the day the peace agreement between Finland and the Soviet Union was signed. The photographs taken after his recovery show permanent scarring from the wound. The Finnish Civil Guard promoted him directly from corporal to second lieutenant, one of the largest single-rank jumps recorded in the Finnish military, in recognition of service that had no adequate institutional precedent. After the war, Häyhä returned to southeastern Finland and spent the rest of his life as a hunter and farmer. He gave few interviews and spoke rarely about the war. When asked late in his life whether he felt regret for the men he had killed, he replied that he had done what he was told as well as he could, and that there would have been no Finland unless everyone had done the same. He died in 2002 at the age of 96. The Battle of Stalingrad, which ran from August 1942 to February 1943, produced a different kind of sniper record. One shaped not by the open snowfields of Karelia, but by the most intensive urban combat of the entire war. The city had been heavily bombed before the street fighting began. The rubble that resulted, shattered concrete, broken masonry, the structural remains of factories and apartment buildings and schools created conditions unlike anything encountered on the open Eastern Front. Movement was measured in yards, not miles. Individual floors of ruined buildings became contested positions. Entire city blocks changed hands multiple times in single days. The average life expectancy for a Soviet soldier arriving in Stalingrad at the height of the battle has been recorded as 24 hours. Snipers operated from positions in water pipes, under collapsed floors, from the rubble of upper floors looking down into streets and courtyards below. The fighting was so close and so fragmented that air support was frequently impossible to use. The front lines were too tangled to distinguish from the air. Snipers and small unit infantry tactics became proportionally more important as a result. Vasily Grigorievich Zaytsev was born in 1915 in the village of Yeleninskoye in the Ural Mountains. He grew up in a peasant family and learned to hunt as a child from his grandfather and elder brother. He shot his first wolf at 12 with a single round from a Burden rifle. By 1937 he had joined the Soviet Navy and was working as a finance clerk with the Pacific Fleet in Vladivostok. He applied 5 times for transfer to the front after Germany invaded in June 1941 before the request was approved. He arrived in Stalingrad in September 1942, assigned to the 1047th Rifle Regiment of the 284th Tomsk Rifle Division, part of General Vasily Trykov's 62nd Army. His talent was apparent within days of arrival. 2 German soldiers appeared in open ground visible from his position. Zaytsev raised his standard-issue rifle and fired twice in quick succession. Both men fell. The regimental commander, who witnessed this, arranged for Zaytsev to be issued a scoped sniper rifle almost immediately. His contemporaries described him as having exceptional sensory capabilities, acute hearing that registered the small sounds of a contested urban landscape, and eyesight precise enough to identify reflected light from optics, at distances where other observers saw only rubble. He had a sustained patience from his years of hunting, and an understanding that the shot itself was the final step in a process of observation that might take hours or days to complete. He concealed himself in multiple types of positions depending on the tactical situation: high ground for observation range, collapsed rubble for protection, and on at least one documented occasion, inside a water pipe where the confined geometry offered cover while maintaining a clear field of fire. He studied the rhythms of the German positions opposite him, relief schedules, officer movement patterns, the times of day when sunlight struck opposing scopes, and binoculars at angles that revealed their location. He tried never to operate with the setting sun behind his target, because the same low-angle glare that might expose a German observer would expose his own optics in the evening light. In the morning, the eastern sun struck the German positions first, giving him an early advantage before the light equalized. In his first 10 days at Stalingrad, before he was formally classified as a sniper, he killed 40 enemy soldiers. Between October and December of 1942, roughly 60 days of continuous urban combat, he killed 225 confirmed enemy soldiers and officers, including 11 enemy snipers. His total confirmed kills at Stalingrad were 242, though some contemporaneous estimates place the true figure higher. He also built a training program. The group of snipers he trained, nicknamed the Zaychata, or Little Hares, a play on his surname, which derives from the Russian word for hare, became a significant force multiplier within the battle. The snipers of the 62nd Army, operating under the method Zaytsev developed, are credited with killing more than 6,000 German soldiers during the Battle of Stalingrad. One of his specific tactical contributions was a formation he called the Sixes. Three two-person teams positioned to cover the same area from three different angles, each pair consisting of a shooter and a spotter. The arrangement provided complete coverage of a field of fire, prevented any single position from being isolated by counterfire, and built resilience into the system. If one position was compromised, the others remained active. The tactic was studied in Russian military training for decades after the war. In his memoirs, Zaytsev wrote that the moment of the shot was the end of the sniper's work, not the beginning. The real work was the sustained observation beforehand, the gradual accumulation of knowledge about an enemy position that eventually allowed a shooter to know exactly where to be and exactly when. He described the identification of enemy sniper positions as the most demanding skill he possessed, more demanding than the marksmanship itself. A competent marksman could be trained relatively quickly. The ability to read a contested urban landscape, to extract from rubble and shadow and timing a reliable picture of the enemy's habits, came only from sustained experience. The most famous story associated with Zaytsev at Stalingrad is a duel with a German master sniper. In his memoirs, Zaytsev identified this opponent as the head of a sniper school near Berlin, a man referred to as König. Soviet wartime propaganda made extensive use of the account. The British historian Antony Beevor, after examining Russian Ministry of Defense archives, concluded that the duel as Zaytsev described it was most likely a creation of Soviet wartime propaganda, and that the German opponent at the center of the story may never have existed. Some researchers have suggested that if a real incident underlies the account, the opponent may have been a German corporal named Hermann Stoff of the 295th Infantry Division, who is documented as having been killed in Stalingrad at approximately the relevant time. The story was later adapted into the 2001 film Enemy at the Gates, with Jude Law portraying Zaytsev. The historical accuracy of the duel narrative remains disputed among scholars. What the story reflects, regardless of its factual basis, is the psychological reality of Stalingrad in late 1942. In a city being destroyed, the account of two identified individuals hunting each other across a few hundred yards of rubble served a function that pure casualty statistics could not. Whether the duel happened as described, something like it was happening constantly in the ruins of Stalingrad, between men whose names were never recorded. In January 1943, a mortar blast caught Zaytsev in the open and severely damaged both of his eyes. He was treated by Vladimir Filatov, a Soviet ophthalmologist who had pioneered corneal transplantation techniques. His sight was restored. He returned to the front and fought through the remaining years of the war, finishing at the Battle of the Silo Heights in Germany. He was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union and the Order of Lenin, ending the war with the rank of captain. After the war, he settled in Kyiv, studied at a textile university, and worked as an engineer before becoming the director of a textile factory. He died in December 1991, 11 days before the dissolution of the Soviet Union. His final request was to be buried in Stalingrad. In January 2006, he was reinterred with full military honors at the Mamayev Kurgan Memorial in Volgograd. The Soviet sniper program's most historically unusual feature was not its scale, but who it trained. Approximately 2,000 women served as snipers in the Red Army during the Second World War. Of that number, roughly 500 survived the duration of the war. The decision to train and deploy female snipers was partly ideological. Soviet doctrine held that women were equal participants in the defense of the state, and partly a straightforward response to the scale of manpower losses that Operation Barbarossa had produced. The Red Army needed fighters and could not restrict the pool. A dedicated school outside Moscow was opened specifically to train female snipers, with requirements that applicants be physically fit, hold at least 7 years of formal education, and be between 18 and 26 years old. Graduates left with full fieldcraft and marksmanship training and went directly to the front. Lyudmila Mikhailovna Pavlichenko was born in 1916 in Bila Tserkva, in what is now Ukraine. By her own description, she was a competitive child, unwilling to concede anything to the boys around her, and she came to shooting through exactly that competitiveness. She heard a neighbor's son boasting about his range scores and went to find out whether she could match them. She could. She earned her Voroshilov sharpshooter badge and continued developing her skills alongside her studies in history at Kyiv University. attending a 2-year course at a sniper school in the city. By the time she graduated, her marks in practical shooting and firearms mechanics were exceptional. She was 24 years old when Germany invaded in June 1941, and also by then a single mother. Her son Rostislav was being raised by his grandmother, while Lyudmila studied and worked. The day after the invasion, she went to the recruiting office in Odessa. The recruiter directed her toward nursing. She produced her shooting certificates and declined. She was assigned to the 25th Chapayev Rifle Division as a sniper, one of roughly 2,000 women who would serve in that role during the war. Due to weapons shortages in the chaotic early weeks of the campaign, she was initially issued a single grenade and no rifle. She got her first weapon from a wounded comrade who pressed his Mosin Nagant into her hands as he was carried from the field. Her first kills came during the siege of Odessa, when 2 Romanian soldiers were digging into a position visible from her location. She was given clearance to engage, steadied, fired twice, and both men fell. She described it in her memoirs as a baptism of fire, and noted that her own kills at that stage did not yet count toward her official tally, which she considered to begin only when she was formally operating in a sniper role. What distinguished Pavlichenko beyond her accuracy was the sustained discipline she brought to the work. She left camp before dawn every morning and returned only at night, spending the intervening hours in forward positions close to enemy lines watching and recording. She studied the patterns of the German and Romanian positions opposite her, sentry schedules, officer movement, the particular locations where carelessness about cover tended to recur. She treated the accumulation of positional knowledge as the foundation of the work, rather than a preliminary to it. She also accepted counter-sniper assignments throughout her service, engagements in which she was sent to locate and kill an identified enemy sniper who was operating against her own side. Counter-sniping is among the most dangerous of sniper missions because both parties know the other is present, both are skilled at concealment, and the outcome depends on who identifies the other's position first. Over the course of her service, Pavlichenko engaged in 36 such duels and won all 36. In one that lasted 3 days, she wrote afterward that it had been the tensest experience of her combat service. She was wounded 4 times before the end of her combat career, twice by artillery blast effect, twice by more directed fire that came close enough to wound without stopping her. After each recovery, she returned to the front. During the siege of Odessa from August to October of 1941, she recorded 187 confirmed kills. After Odessa was evacuated, she continued through the siege of Sevastopol. By May of 1942, her credited kills stood at 257. She was promoted to senior sergeant upon confirming her 100th kill and to lieutenant when the count passed 200. In June of 1942, mortar shrapnel struck her face. The Soviet High Command evacuated her from Sevastopol by submarine and removed her from frontline duty. Her total confirmed kills at the time of withdrawal were 309, including the 36 enemy snipers. No other female sniper in any army of any nation had approached that figure at the time. None has since. The Soviet government, seeking Allied support for the opening of a second front in Western Europe, sent Pavlichenko on a public tour in 1942, traveling to the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. The tour went poorly by her own account. At press conferences in Washington, reporters asked about the cut of her uniform and her makeup habits. She told them she found it difficult to understand why they were asking about her clothes when she had spent 2 years killing fascists, and that she had been under fire, had been wounded 4 times, and would appreciate questions directed accordingly. The press referred to her as the girl sniper and devoted column inches to assessments of her appearance that she found both baffling and insulting. She also raised at public events the question of why American women factory workers were paid less than men, and protested when she was barred from boarding a Royal Navy warship during the British leg of her tour. The German army, aware of her record and apparently hoping to disrupt it before she was withdrawn from the front, had already attempted to recruit her. Messages broadcast over loudspeakers at the Sevastopol front offered her chocolate and a German officer's commission if she crossed the lines. When that failed, the messages became threats. One stated that if captured she would be torn into 309 pieces. She noted afterward that at least the enemy had the accuracy of her kill count correct. The tour produced at least one substantive outcome. she formed a genuine friendship with Eleanor Roosevelt, who hosted her at the White House and invited her to travel the country. Franklin Roosevelt received her formally. She became the first Soviet citizen to be received by a sitting American president. Eleanor Roosevelt wrote of her afterward that she embodied something universal that connected people across languages. They continued corresponding after Pavlichenko returned to the Soviet Union. In 1957, Eleanor Roosevelt, visiting Moscow, refused to leave without seeing Pavlichenko. She was taken to a small two-room apartment. The two managed briefly to speak privately, slipping past their respective attendants. Pavlichenko returned to Kiev University after the war and completed her history degree, becoming a researcher and later a lecturer. She worked as a senior researcher for the Soviet Navy. She struggled for years with what is now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. She died in October 1974 at 58. The Soviet Union issued 2 commemorative postage stamps in her honor, one in 1943 and one in 1976. Historians have raised questions about aspects of Soviet wartime record-keeping, including some elements of Pavlichenko's recorded kill count, though the broad outlines of her service are not in serious dispute. The Eastern Front also produced a number of other Soviet snipers whose names are less known outside Russia, but whose records are substantial. Fyodor Oklopkov was an ethnic Yakut from the Sakha region of what is now northeastern Russia, with a background in the indigenous hunting culture of the far north that gave him, as Häyhä's background had given him, skills built through decades of practice rather than weeks of military instruction. He enlisted after his brother was killed in the fighting and compiled 429 confirmed sniper kills, with additional kills attributed to machine gun fire. He was wounded multiple times, including a chest wound in 1944 that effectively ended his combat service. He was decorated as a hero of the Soviet Union in 1965 and died in 1968. A cargo ship was named after him in 1974. Mikhail Budenkov compiled 437 sniper kills without counting those taken with other weapons. Vladimir Pavlichenko had 456 confirmed kills, many of them in terrain he knew intimately. Ivan Sidorenko, who also served as a sniper trainer, is credited with 500. Ilyin, a locksmith before the war who had worked his way to sniper qualification after joining the Red Army, reached 494 confirmed kills. The pattern running through all of them points to the same source: the training investment that the Soviet Union had made in the 1930s when other nations were systematically dismantling the same capability. Of the top 100 snipers by confirmed kill count in the Second World War, approximately 95 were Soviet. The Soviet Union trained more than 428,000 individuals in sniper skills during the war, of whom approximately 9,500 received advanced qualification and were deployed as full-time snipers. During the war, 261 Soviet marksmen and women, each with more than 50 confirmed kills, were awarded the formal title of Distinguished Sniper. They were deployed at a minimum of 1 per infantry and reconnaissance platoon, integrated throughout the force structure. Their operating philosophy, articulated consistently by the most effective commanders, prioritized officers and specialist personnel as targets over ordinary infantry, on the calculation that experienced leadership and specialist knowledge were harder to replace than bodies. Germany entered the war without a functioning systematic sniper program, having dismantled it after 1918. The fighting on the Eastern Front quickly demonstrated this to be a serious liability. By 1942 and 1943, the Wehrmacht was building new sniper training infrastructure and equipping units with dedicated sniper weapons. The standard German sniper rifle for much of the war was the bolt-action Karabiner 98K, fitted with a telescopic sight, accurate, reliable, and effective in the hands of a trained operator. Later in the war, a semi-automatic design called the Gewehr 43 was also fielded in a sniper configuration, capable of higher rates of fire and effective to 875 yards with its ZF-4 scope. German sniper training, when it developed in earnest, drew on the country's established civilian tradition of competitive marksmanship, organized through shooting clubs and festivals called Schützenfeste. The same tradition had given the English language the word sharpshooter, borrowed from the German Scharfschütze. the snipers that emerged from the rebuilt German program were generally technically proficient, sometimes extraordinarily so. Two of them, both Austrian rather than German by birth, served in the same division on the Eastern Front, and together compiled more than 600 confirmed kills in the final stages of the war. Joseph Allerberger came to sniping at 19, initially through necessity rather than formal selection. His craft developed through experience on the Eastern Front, through the accumulation of knowledge about what worked and what resulted in death. He became inventive in his methods. His most noted adaptation was modifying an umbrella frame to carry vegetation collected from the local terrain, creating camouflage that matched the immediate surroundings and moved with him rather than remaining static. He survived the war, a distinction that already separates him from a large proportion of his contemporaries. His divisional colleague, Matthias Hetzenauer, compiled 345 confirmed kills, the highest total for any sniper in the German Wehrmacht. He also achieved the longest verified kill shot of the entire Second World War, a confirmed engagement at approximately 1,100 meters, just over 1,200 yards. At that distance, the target is not visible to the naked eye. The shooter is relying entirely on optics and on calculations of wind direction, wind speed at multiple altitudes, and bullet drop that involve applied physics as much as marksmanship. Hetzenauer was captured by Soviet forces in May of 1945 and held for 5 years before returning to Austria. He left behind detailed accounts of sniper tactics, training, and technique, studied subsequently by military historians. He observed that the highest value in sniper work resided not in kill totals but in the targeted removal of commanders and specialists whose loss damaged an enemy's ability to function, the same principle that the best Soviet sniper commanders had reached independently. Both Allerberger and Hetzenauer received the Knight's Cross for their service. The Pacific and Asian theaters of the war produced a sniper conflict shaped almost entirely by environment. The island campaigns, Guadalcanal, New Guinea, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, were fought in dense jungle where visibility was often measured in dozens of yards, and long-range precision fire was rarely the operative requirement. What mattered in that terrain was concealment, patience, and the ability to remain stationary in conditions of heat, humidity, and insect life that made staying still a physical ordeal. Japanese snipers were trained with an emphasis on exactly those qualities. Each Imperial Japanese Army infantry platoon by 1941 typically included a designated sniper, selected for marksmanship, the capacity to subsist on minimal rations, and the psychological ability to remain concealed for extended periods. Their primary weapon was the Type 97 sniper rifle, a bolt-action based on the Type 38, chambered for the 6.5 by 50 mm Arisaka round. The telescopic sight was fixed, not adjustable for windage or elevation, and its effective range was generally considered limited to around 270 meters, though the weapon itself could be fired accurately at longer distances. In jungle conditions, where most engagements took place within a few hundred yards, this was not a significant limitation. The long barrel of the Type 97 burned its propellant thoroughly, producing very little muzzle flash or smoke. This made counter-sniping difficult. An Allied soldier who heard a shot and looked toward it would often see only undisturbed vegetation. Japanese snipers used the jungle's upper canopy as firing positions, rigging themselves into branches and fronds with equipment and natural materials. Early Allied units encountered this and, unfamiliar with how to respond to fire from concealed elevated positions, sometimes went to ground under fire, which provided the sniper with stationary targets rather than resolving the threat. Experienced commanders came to recognize that continuing to advance, forcing the sniper to either relocate or commit to a position that could be identified and suppressed, was generally more effective than attempting to locate the position while stationary. Allied counter-sniper doctrine in the Pacific evolved through hard experience across successive campaigns. Machine gun teams learned to work the tree lines systematically. Coordinated ground observation from multiple positions was used to triangulate shot origins. One documented British theater report describes 48 snipers from 2 brigades killing 296 Japanese fighters over a 2-week period, for the loss of 2 men killed and 1 wounded, a ratio reflecting the degree to which trained, organized counter-sniping had been absorbed into tactical practice by that point in the war. The The United States Marine Corps developed its scout sniper culture from scratch during the Pacific Campaign. The tradition began at Guadalcanal in 1942 and matured through Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Marine scout snipers were not only precision shooters, they were reconnaissance operatives expected to operate ahead of their own lines and return with intelligence as well as confirmed kills. Their primary weapon was the M1903A4 Springfield, a bolt action that remained the preferred platform for precision work, despite the introduction of the semi-automatic Garand. Some Marines also used the Winchester Model 70, a civilian hunting rifle pressed into service and respected for its accuracy. One account from the Pacific illustrates the war's reach in terms of individual biography. Marine Private Harlan Hinkle, enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor, attended the Scout Sniper School at Camp Elliott in California, and served on 10 Pacific islands. On one mission, he shot a Japanese sniper who turned out to be a woman. He reached her before she died. She told him she had lived in California for 16 years, that she had graduated from the University of California, and that she had returned to Japan to visit relatives before the war started. When the conflict began, she had been forced into the army. She died on a Pacific island, shot by a man from the same country she had spent most of her adult life in. The Italian campaign, which ran from the summer of 1943 through the end of the war in May 1945, produced a third variant of the sniper conflict, shaped by the geography of the Apennine Mountains. The spine of the Italian peninsula created a succession of river lines and ridge positions that the defending German forces developed into some of the most formidable natural defensive terrain of the entire war. The names associated with the campaign, Monte Cassino, the Winter Line, the Gothic Line, Anzio, each represent months of attritional fighting in terrain that concentrated the advantage with the defender. In mountain warfare, long sight lines create conditions that favor precision marksmen. A sniper holding a position on a forward slope could dominate the approaches to an entire valley floor. The German defensive lines in Italy incorporated sniper positions as structural elements, not afterthoughts. Approaching an assault position often meant first locating and neutralizing the snipers covering the approach routes, a specialized problem that the best Allied units worked out over months of experience in that specific terrain. British and Commonwealth forces, including troops from New Zealand, South Africa, India, Canada, and Poland, built on 3 years of accumulated sniper experience and applied it to mountain conditions with considerable effectiveness. New Zealand snipers, many from rural farming backgrounds with long-range shooting experience in open hill country, proved well suited to Italian mountain terrain. Canadian snipers, equipped with the Long Branch Lee Enfield and trained to a standard matching or exceeding the British, maintained throughout the Italian campaign the reputation they had established in Sicily. Their snipers were equipped with the Lee Enfield No. 4 Mark I T, a precision variant of the standard infantry rifle fitted with a No. 32 telescopic sight and a raised cheek pad for prone shooting. It was a reliable, accurate weapon produced in large numbers, and in the hands of well-trained operators it was effective to 800 yards and beyond. American sniper performance in Italy, as elsewhere, was uneven at the institutional level. The United States Army never fully resolved the inconsistency in its sniper program during the war. Individual officers sometimes built effective local programs. Colonel Sidney Hines of the 41st Armored Infantry Regiment established a 5-week training course in Tunisia, but there was no equivalent of the systematic investment that Soviet, British, or German programs represented. The primary American sniper weapon was the M1903A4 Springfield, with a Weaver 330 scope. Some units also used the M1C Garand in a scoped configuration. American soldiers generally had excellent marksmanship from a strong civilian shooting tradition, but fieldcraft, the ability to move in terrain without being detected, to read the ground for tactical advantage, was less consistently developed than in other forces. The Western European campaign that opened with the Normandy landings in June 1944 added another chapter. The bocage country of Normandy, thick earthen embankments topped with dense vegetation, centuries-old farm boundaries that created a landscape of enclosed compartments, provided German defenders with concealment comparable to jungle. German snipers used it systematically, targeting Allied officers and NCOs with enough consistency that unit leadership was being degraded at rates that affected operational pace. Captain William Jalland of the 8th Battalion Durham Light Infantry later noted that his own snipers regarded Normandy as favorable country, finding German units in his sector often careless about exposure. Both sides worked the same ground simultaneously, each watching for the lapses in the other's concealment discipline that allowed a shot. As the Allied advance moved east through autumn and winter into Germany, the terrain shifted to dense forest. The Hurtgen Forest consumed American divisions in fighting from September 1944 into early 1945, and then to the ruins of German cities. In those environments, German snipers remained a persistent operational problem into the final weeks of the war. The veterans among them, men who had come through years on the Eastern Front, were methodical and difficult to locate. Some of the youngest, assigned to sniper roles as the Wehrmacht's experienced manpower was exhausted, showed less discipline about relocating after firing, a practice that experienced observers on both sides recognized as a distinction in training and judgment rather than courage. The physical mechanics of a long shot are worth describing plainly because they clarify what the discipline actually requires. At 500 meters, a relatively common sniper engagement distance, the bullet is in the air for roughly half a second. During that time it is being deflected by wind, which may vary in speed and direction at different heights above the ground. The bullet is losing velocity and falling under gravity. The shooter's own heartbeat raises and lowers the muzzle by a small but significant amount with every pulse. The standard technique is to fire between heartbeats in the brief still interval when the body is neither contracting nor expanding. At 1,000 meters, the range at which Hetzenauer and a handful of others regularly worked, the bullet is in the air for more than a second. Wind corrections are substantial, and the bullet's drop over that distance is measured in feet rather than inches. The spotter working alongside the shooter is providing continuous information on wind speed, direction, and environmental conditions, feeding a firing solution that the shooter integrates before the moment of the trigger press. All of this occurs under field conditions that may include enemy fire, physical exhaustion, cold, and the awareness that the act of firing may expose a position that has been maintained through hours of careful concealment. The psychological effect of sniper activity on the opposing force was distinct from the effect of other forms of fire. Artillery and machine gun fire killed people by the indiscriminate mathematics of blast radius and cone of dispersion, a sniper selected. The soldiers on the receiving end of sustained sniper activity described a specific quality of dread different from the fear of bombardment, a sense that the landscape itself had become observational, that the rubble or the tree line or the hedgerow opposite might contain someone who had already made a decision. Units under persistent sniper pressure moved differently, more slowly, with heightened and exhausting watchfulness. Officers were lost at rates that disrupted planning and coordination in ways that were difficult to compensate for, because experienced leadership in the field is not interchangeable with whoever happens to be next in the chain of command. The informal ethics of warfare treated snipers with a particular hostility. There was something about the deliberate concealment, the patient targeting of specific individuals, and the one-sided character of the engagement. The sniper sees the target does not see the sniper, that struck soldiers on the receiving end as categorically different from conventional infantry combat, where at least the men shooting at each other could see one another. If caught, a sniper could expect treatment that went beyond the formal rules of war. A well-documented comment from an aide to General Omar Bradley noted that Bradley would take no action against anyone who chose to treat a captured sniper more roughly than the rules of war technically required. The informal consensus was consistent across theaters and armies. Snipers on all sides were aware of it. In the months and years after the war ended, the men and women who had served as snipers came home to the same disrupted world as everyone else, with the additional weight of work that did not translate easily into civilian life or conversation. Simo Häyhä returned to southeastern Finland, becoming a hunter and farmer in the same landscape that had trained him. He gave few interviews and spoke rarely about the war. He lived to 96. Lyudmila Pavlichenko returned to Kyiv University and completed her history degree, becoming a researcher and lecturer as she had always planned. She worked as a senior researcher for the Soviet Navy from 1945 to 1953. She struggled in the years that followed with post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. She died in October 1974 at 58. Her son was with her at the end. Joseph Allerberger returned to Austria after the war. He left a memoir that military historians have drawn on as a primary account of Eastern Front sniper operations, detailed, direct, and written in the matter-of-fact register of a man describing a craft rather than performing a narrative. Matthias Hetzenauer returned to Austria after 5 years of Soviet captivity, living until 2004. He left technical accounts of sniper methods and doctrine that have also been studied, and said little else. Vasily Zaytsev built his post-war life in Kyiv, becoming an engineer and eventually a factory director. He died in December 1991, 11 days before the dissolution of the Soviet Union. His wish to be buried in Stalingrad was honored in 2006. He is interred at the Mamayev-Kurgan Memorial in Volgograd, on the hill that was contested meter by meter during the battle he fought in. Rosa Shanina, the Soviet female sniper who had joined the war after losing her brother in the siege of Leningrad, who had trained herself at a shooting range before being accepted to the Female Sniper Academy, who had reached 42 confirmed kills by the end of August 1944, was killed in action in January 1945, at 21 years old, attempting to protect a wounded officer from shell fire. A school in Russia bears her name. Her diary, kept throughout the war, records the experience with a directness that is rare in the literature of the period, written close to events rather than recollected at a distance. The doctrine developed on the Eastern Front, particularly the Soviet emphasis on targeting officers and specialists, the integration of snipers at the platoon level, and the use of coordinated multi-position teams, influenced military thinking for decades after the war. The Marine Scout sniper tradition that emerged from Guadalcanal became the foundation of American military sniper capability that later developed through subsequent conflicts. The fieldcraft principles refined by British practitioners carried forward into the training programs of the armies that followed. Simo Häyhä's rejection of optical sights in favor of mastered fundamentals remained a reference point in training doctrine, a reminder that technical sophistication is secondary to the core requirements of patience, concealment, and accurate fire. The Second World War produced large-scale operations that are studied primarily as the movements of armies, fleets, and air forces across theaters of continental scale. The sniper's contribution to those operations ran alongside the main events, largely invisible in the historical record relative to what it achieved. Every advance that stalled at a particular point because the officers directing it had been removed. Every defensive position held beyond its apparent capacity because a single trained observer was denying the attacking force the information it needed to break through. Every engagement in which the weight of decision shifted not through armored maneuver or aerial bombardment, but through a single shot placed at a distance and from a position that left no obvious trace. Those moments are the work of snipers, and they are distributed throughout the war from Finland in 1939 to Germany in 1945. The people who did that work were not symbols or abstractions. They were individuals whose specific backgrounds, rural Finland, the Ural Mountains, the industrial city of Odessa, the indigenous north of Siberia, the Austrian Alps, had prepared them, in different ways, for a discipline that most people cannot sustain under the conditions in which it had to be practiced. They showed, across different armies and different theaters and different political systems, a consistency in what the work required: patience, precision, physical endurance, and the capacity to remain calm in conditions designed to produce the opposite. History records the big movements. The snipers worked in the spaces between them, quietly, from concealment, changing things in ways that the official record only partially captures. They were there. The full history of the war includes them. Good night, and thank you for spending this time with the history, 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 spending this time